Everybody, welcome back to 2 Hours on a Sunday. I'm Brian.
I'm Nick, and today we have a very special guest. He's one of our oldest friends. He is my best man. He's a drummer. He's super fun. His name is Brandon Lefrancois.
Hello. Thank you for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Wow, just coming in hot on that one. Just kidding. Hi, Brandon. Good to have you on here.
It is an honor to be on your podcast.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
We figured what better way to have this podcast than to have an actual musician. Because, Nick, you're just a fake musician. You play bass.
I just go along for the ride for the most part. So, yeah.
Bass players don't count.
No.
So today, I'm biased as hell for this movie. And I think this is the greatest animated movie of all time. And today we're talking about Disney's Tarzan. Well, what I think, other than the story and the animation, what makes this movie stand the test of time is the soundtrack. And this is exactly why we have Brandon on today, because the soundtrack, I think, is one of the best soundtracks ever created from a Disney film. And Phil Collins really gave us the heart and soul of what brought this movie to life. So, Brandon, what do you think about them hiring Phil Collins and what he brought to the entire movie?
Well, I think that it was a good choice. I'll say that. And for many, many reasons, obviously. They needed a really strong voice as far as obviously vocally, but as a songwriter and someone who can really take the reins, which he did. And that's evident in the songs and the lyrics. I suppose just how intentional it all was with him. That's the one thing I noticed as I went back and listened to it and watched the movie again, is the intent behind the lyrics and the music. And that's Phil. That's how he plays music. That's how he plays the drums. That's how he sings. It's full of direct intent. People think progressive rock music, which is where Phil comes from, playing with Genesis and even with some of his solo stuff, even though that was a little more poppy. But, his drumming was just like a train. Just, it was so, like I said, it had that intent behind it. Even though he was incredibly gifted, he played. A lot of people don't. Maybe this is what I can bring to this podcast, is kind of explaining Phil as a drummer and as a musician, and how that influenced the Tarzan soundtrack and what made it so special.
Well, because for the time, right, when they were doing the soundtrack, because this movie came out in 99, they were probably working on this in 96. I feel like he was at the peak.
Yeah, you're right. In 1995, they started working on it, and he left Genesis around that time too. And I think the movie was a big part of that. He had to focus on that whole project. It's only 5 songs. It's only a few songs, but every song has to be just poured over, probably because it's going to be in one of the highest budget movies they probably made at that point, right?
Because it even bleeds into the score too, right? Like Mark Mancina, they obviously had to piggyback on what Phil had brought, and hiring Phil, they knew they needed that drum background for the African jungle and the overall atmosphere of the film. The whole soundtrack in general, even the score, is really the testament to how good the movie is and why they brought Phil Collins on.
I think he was sent the script, the treatment, and then he started writing and making demos. And I think those went on to become the main bulk of those songs, which is so cool. Because if you look at the lyrics, it's just so one of the things about this movie that's different from the other ones is Phil's the narrator. Phil is the narrator of those movies. The characters are not singing.
Yeah. The lyrics, I feel like, especially at the beginning in Two Worlds, yeah, it's a narration, but it's done in a really artistic way. It's not deliberately just telling you the story. It's giving it to you in a very tasteful way, and you can see it visually. But as you're listening to it, it's I listened to the soundtrack yesterday, and as I was listening to it, I was picturing those scenes, and I was like, oh, they're not spelling it out for me. They're doing it in a very lyrical way, but you can still visualize everything that's going on.
Yeah, he's tapping into the archetypes of what's happening, like on a deeper level. It's not so it's not on the surface. He's really tapping into the meaning of the story, which I think why those songs still last to this day is because they're powerful. It's the other ones are great, but something about those songs, there's power behind them, man. The lyrics too, not just the music.
Because even Son of Man is more, it's used to tell the transition of time in the film from child to adult, but it's not, the song isn't telling oh yeah, he's getting older. It's foretelling he will be walking amongst, like, he will be a leader one day. Like, it's basically telling us his future. Like, you have to live up. You're gonna be able to live up to this. You're a man, but you're a leader of a tribe. You're eventually going to become what you want to become, right?
I guess with that song, it's really just like he's pointing to the archetype more than I guess the character would be able to. Because if the character is just singing themselves, they're figuring it out for themselves, and you're watching them figure it out. But Phil is in the third person. He's narrating. He's explaining to you what's going on, on a deeper level. And it's not like that he's, becoming a man, coming of age, but something about the song and the intent behind the lyrics really hits home the deeper archetype of that sort of story arch, right? So
Well, because his whole thing at that point, right, is he wants to be the best ape ever. He gets in trouble with Kerchak, right, because of what the mess he caused. And, he's having a conversation with Kala, and he says, I'm going to prove it to him. I'm going to be the best ape ever. And that's when you start the whole montage of him growing up and learning to be what he is. And that's why Son of Man works so well as a, like Brandon said, a third person narrative. This is what he really wants to be doing, but we're hearing it in an upbeat song.
it's very different from the Lion King, because in the Lion King, Simba is kind of a fool for most of the movie. And what I mean by the fool is like Simba's learning himself, and like he's first person. I just can't wait to be king. Like it's gonna be awesome. It's so like short sighted,
Yeah,
right?
he's jumping so far ahead into his future. It's almost like at this point, because we talk about Phil narrating, but I think Strangers Like Me is really what Tarzan's mind is actually going through at the time. He's so fascinated with this new world that he's been introduced to with the humans, and like, I love how they do the film and he's swapping out the images so he can learn as much as he can as fast as he can, and everything is coming at him at 1,000 miles an hour, and he's coming into like, am I actually meant for more than the jungle? And these strangers, I finally feel like I'm connected to something other than the jungle.
It's also his it starts his love spark interest there too in the second verse. It's like first verse is about the world, like he's missed, right? Second verse, it's the girl, right? Like who's the conduit to that world, right?
I think the way that the music and the story were put together, how they were, it really felt like they were thought of very carefully and they were very intentionally done. Visually, we see this story, and the music and the lyrics just go so well with it. It wasn't just a together music and story kind of thing. It was so well crafted. And like I said before, if I could listen to that song and I can picture every beat of that whole introduction, from the ship crashing to building the treehouse to the whole instrumental part where their baby is getting chased by Sabor. All of that stuff, it's ingrained in my head, and I think they do such a good job putting it all together.
I'm pretty sure that was a lot of it was Phil. And again, it's like it's coming from that place of like he's got a family. He's a father. Like he's really feeling these characters and what they're going through, right? He's really getting into that mindset, and he crushes it. Like it's so genuine. Like that's why you feel it. That's why it still holds up.
Yep, I agree. I feel it is very genuine. Yeah, you're probably right. It is coming from a place of him being a newer father, and that's probably one of the most important things that he's going through at the time, and it's probably the best inspiration he can pull from.
Yep.
And at this point in the movie, Kala brings Tarzan back to the rest of the gorillas, and we meet all the other characters. We meet Turk. We finally get Kerchak coming in, and I think Kerchak is one of the coolest characters in this movie. Not just because he's like the silverback, right? He's the leader of the crew, but like the voice that comes out of him is such a commanding presence, and I absolutely love it. But when he first sees Kala again, and he walks up with that curiosity, he gives her the speech that, this won't replace the one we lost. And she's like, oh, I know. She tells him about Sabor, and that she just wanted to take care because she's a mother, right? Now that she's lost a child, she has that motherly instinct. So she just wanted to take care of it. And that Kerchak tells her that, he'll never be one of us. And she's like, I know, but I can't do nothing. Like, I need to take care of him. So Kerchak is, already on the standoff. And then we get the You'll Be in My Heart track, which transitions again to Passage of Time to Tarzan as, a youth. And You'll Be in My Heart is also one of the greatest songs in this track, just for Kala in general, like their whole relationship, because it plays anytime they're together, even instrumentally, it plays.
That song won the Oscar that year for best song.
Yeah,
Good.
of course it did.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I don't know if you know, like watching it again, I didn't know who voiced young Tarzan, but now hearing it immediately, I knew who the kid was, and he was in Max Keeble's Big Move. He was in Home Alone 3. He was
Oh,
the biggest kid in the early 2000s for all those Disney films, and he actually he did actually the baby Tarzan stuff too, like all the cries. He did that stuff too. He was
oh, that's
credited.
cool.
Yeah, so I think they did a great job at casting him. But this whole sequence before Son of Man, it really captures the childlike nature of Tarzan and like him messing with Turk and the gang, and they don't really want him around because they don't think he's cool because he's not a gorilla. And Tarzan wants to be involved so much, and so we get to the point where they dare him to go get an elephant hair, right, to be part of the crew, and then he jumps off the ledge because Tarzan just wants to be accepted, and then they're like, oh, you should bring him around more often, this kid's great, and they're making jokes, and he lands, and this is when we first meet Tantor, and then everything creates chaos, and then Tantor comes around, and he's like, the bonding immediately of friendship was so fast because it's like kids, right? Even like when we were kids, we immediately wanted to be friends in like 2 seconds.
It didn't take much,
It didn't take
exactly.
much. So when Tantor was like, "Oh, I had a whole tail of them," and he's just waving his tail, and it's like, okay, this whole problem could have been solved in 2 seconds if you guys were friends. This is when we get Kerchak coming in, really delivering. You could have hurt someone. Like Tarzan, this is his first time probably hearing consequence, right? You think?
I mean, for the purposes of the story, for sure. It's just like that's his first truly like I messed up interaction and getting the consequences from the leader. Yeah, just seeing Kerchak actually discipline Tarzan. Not, I don't know. What did you think about it? Did you think it was out of like him dipping his toes into like being the father for him, or it was just like, no, you're this. I am like all done with you.
No, yeah, no, like that's Kerchak's fatal flaw in the movie is he doesn't accept Tarzan until it's too late. Doesn't
Exactly.
accept him. He says, like you're not going to be one of us. Like
Right.
so he's not coming from a fatherly place. He's coming from
a leader and a protector.
yeah,
Exactly.
he's being kind of the he's being a tyrant, right, in this part of the movie, and it's justified, like like who wouldn't be, like this is a total outside threat, and that's his concern through the whole movie. And then then you go into Son of Man from there, right?
Yeah, you go into because Tarzan runs away, right? He tries to cater to Kerchak, but Kerchak's not having it, and then he runs away, and he ends up at the lake or the little pond, and he's looking at himself in the water, and he puts all the mud on top of him because he doesn't look like any of them, so he's having this whole internal
Identity
battle with
crisis, essentially.
himself, and then she brings them back together with the whole what do I see? I see two eyes, a nose, 2 ears. She does what a mother should do, right? In this
Yeah.
instance where to protect her child, but to really make him understand that he's her son, right? And then when he gets all excited, like two hands, and he points it up, and then he realizes when he puts his hand next to hers, they're not the same. And so there's that, and then the music swells again, right? That has that little keyboard in the background, like of sadness, like, and then that's when she gives him, Tarzan. Kerchak doesn't see what I see, is really what she says. And he's like, I'll make him see it. And he's like, I'm going to be the best ape ever. And that's when we kick off with Son of Man. This song really shows how much Tarzan loves being in the jungle, right? And how much he wants to prove he can be the best ape. And following Son of Man is one of my favorite scenes in the movie. And we get into, again, him going off to, fight with Turk and wrestle. And Tantor's like, oh, he's the worrier of the group. So he's just hopping around. He's like, it's all fun and games until someone loses an eye. He says all that stuff. And then at this point, what I loved about the matte paintings in this movie, he notices something as he's fighting Turk, and he's looking out. And I don't know if you guys noticed this when you watched it, but if you look off into the jungle, you can see Sabor's silhouette in the painting, and you can see his eyes.
I don't know if I noticed that.
Yeah, and it's so ominous, and you can see the eyes are like bright yellow. and it's like formed into the tree branch, like he's just crouching, like he's camouflaged, and it's super cool. And Tarzan's like he's staring at it, but he doesn't. It's he's not alerted yet, so he just turns around, and that's when Sabor comes out of nowhere, right? You can tell in the scene Glenn Keane was all over the scene because I
Yeah,
feel like anytime Tarzan has a big moment, the drawings change slightly, and you can tell Glenn Keane was in charge of this whole thing. And this is when we get the battle between Tarzan and Sabor. And this is the most stressful point of the movie because he's never, you could tell he hasn't fought something like this yet, but him swinging through the trees, you could tell he's veteran. Like he knows his surroundings and he's good with his weapons. He's built them himself. And by the end of it, the way they rise him up, like he's carrying Sabor, but it looks like
Sabor is on top.
Sabor is on top of him, and he's won. But then Tarzan lifts him up and drops him, and then the gorillas go crazy. And what does he do? That's one of my favorite parts. Is he lifts him up? Would you call it a yodel? Like the like what would you call it? Because it's basically like a yodel in a way, right?
Yeah,
His battle cry,
that's actually a perfect analogy for it because
but more
it's a call
badass.
that's meant to travel. It's meant to travel, right? It's meant to travel through the like the natural, you know.
Yeah, the jungle. Like people know his war cry. Like when gorillas beat their chest, right? That this is his way of saying like I can be a protector as well. So he raises him up. He gives the battle cry, and then Kerchak is on the outskirts, right? He's looking down, and you get this little exchange where he turns around, and you could tell like he's getting older and he can't defend the family like he used to, and there's like that hesitation in him. But then Tarzan comes up and delivers Sabor to
Like the
him in a way,
prize,
like a prize. Like
because he still knows he's the alpha
yeah,
of the group.
he's not in charge, so Tarzan knows it's like he's still trying to pay tribute to Kerchak, but he's honoring him in a way that's like, I know you could have handled this yourself, but I knew I had to step in for the family. And so
Right.
at that point you get the connection between them, and it was even there was nothing, there was like subtle music, but it was just their eyes, right?
Yeah.
The shot of their eyes, and then all of a sudden you hear a gunshot. Kerchak's not having. He's like, everybody, let's move. And that's when Tarzan goes off. He's not afraid of what's out there. He just wants to be a part of it, right?
Right. He wants to experience it. Well, and that kind of lends to his being a little bit different than everybody else. There's something in him calling for more adventure. But that scene is great because it's almost like they're so close to making paternal son connection, and they're connecting, their eyes are connecting, but then it's interrupted.
Yeah.
They're so close, but again, it's that new inconvenience, that new challenge that's stopping that from happening.
And this is when we first meet the other humans, right? We meet Jane, we meet Clayton, and we meet her father, Archimedes Q. Porter,
Yeah.
Atro Service. And then this is when Tarzan first sees humans, right?
Yep.
They have the moment in the tree. He sees her foot, right? He's playing with her foot. And then he wants to hear her heartbeat because that's what Kala did for him, right? If they have a heartbeat, then they're the same. When she finally goes to slap him because he's getting too handsy, right? He sees her hand and he pulls the glove off, and then that's when he puts his hand up to hers. I think it's one of my favorite parts of the movie because it happens at the end as well. But it's, as an image for Tarzan, it's the most impactful, I think, to really see someone else's hand that looks like yours, and that's when he wakes up and is like, oh my God, I'm not the only one.
Yeah, because that was that big struggle, that first talk with his mom, with Kala. Like, they might be similar, they're still hands, but they're different, and he's not comfortable with that yet. But now he finally sees somebody that is more similar to him now.
And we haven't talked about it yet, but what does trashing the camp do to this movie in terms of bringing the humans and the gorillas together musically?
What's cool about that scene is and we can talk about this more later with you'd asked me at the beginning, why Phil Collins? And my answer, drums, right? What do the gorillas do when they see these objects? They start hitting them like percussion instruments, right? The drums are so integral to our DNA as humans, right? That's what I see in that scene is that's the connection between, once again, the human world and the ape world. And there's this connection with the rhythm, right? The rhythm of the jungle, the rhythm of the human world. It's very nicely kind of entangled together in that scene, right? I hope that makes sense. But what I'm trying to say is, again, like, you're going back to this theme of like different but the same, right? The primal nature of the drum and percussion and rhythm. That's what you get with that song, I think. And that's what connects, these two worlds together.
And I think what's also great about it is the perspective of the scene, because from the monkey's perspective, they're crushing it, right? They're having the time of their life.
Right.
But
Yep.
when Tarzan and Jane swing in and the music stops, it just looks like they're just breaking everything, right? It's just chaos. Like it doesn't
That's how
sound like
Nick feels sometimes when we're on stage together.
That is exactly
yeah,
how it feels.
I think I'm killing it, and
And I'm just like,
it probably just sounds like that, like just a bunch of nonsense. But that's exactly right. It's like it's that like excitement of like we're making music, and
yeah,
you're getting their perspective versus the human's perspective on it. Yeah, it's amazing. It's so, I think it was completely intentional, that whole thing. And then if you want to go deeper with this, they did have like a bunch of pots and pans in the studio. I think I saw a scene where Phil was hitting it with like drumsticks and these what are called hot rods, like brush sticks, which make a cool sound. I'm sure there was a real typewriter too, like
yeah,
that typewriter sound is ingrained in my head.
yeah. Ding.
Like, yep.
I love when he first figures it out and it goes, and he's like, and then he starts typing all fast and he's like, ding, and then he's like, oh, he hits it and he's
Yep.
like, oh, I feel something happening.
Rhythm is so ingrained in our DNA and in our evolution and in our history as humans, right? And that's the connection again between the apes and the humans is rhythm, right?
Yep.
It's so cool that they put that in there.
And from here, I feel this everything kind of comes together, and there's this because when the Turk and them first see Jane and Tarzan together, they're all like freaking out and they're scared, and then you see Kerchak behind them, and he's looking around the camp like, this is what I feared the most, having Tarzan a part of our family. This is when you get the scene that Kerchak is, another beautifully lit scene, if I might add, like the orange hues and the blues and like everything that's happening. And Kerchak's giving the speech like, keep your distance, don't anybody engage, and we need to protect our family. And Tarzan's trying to defend it because he's saying like, how can you be afraid of something that looks different than you? Like,
You're only
yeah,
afraid like because they're different, right?
yeah.
Right.
And so the whole thing, he's like, I told you to protect this family. Like, I want you to protect this family. And this is when, we first start to get Jane and Tarzan's relationship building.
It is truly the growing up portion of the movie where he's stepping away from what he's used to or what he's comfortable with and seeking out adventure. And his family, his Kala, is worried about him, just like any parent would be when a kid goes off to do new things or try new things. I love this part of the movie because it's so much development for him.
And after Strangers Like Me, he's so in love with this new ideal. There's someone like him that immediately after this scene, he has to find out that they have to leave. Because during the song, they ask him, can we go see the gorillas? And he says no. And they say, why? And he's like, Kerchak. And there's a whole reason why. But then once he realizes that Jane can't stay, there's like this subtle switch in him where now his family isn't the most important thing. It's like this other entity that he's now discovered who he is he's trying to cater to both sides in a way because he loves Jane, but also at the same time he doesn't want to hurt his family. But at this point, he asks Turk and Tantor to distract Kerchak so he can give Jane her wish, right? Because I don't think he cares about he doesn't care about Clayton or anything. He just wants to be with Jane is the whole point of this, right? So he finally says, okay, I can bring you to my family. Obviously, he's made a crucial mistake in bringing his family because he doesn't know neither does Jane, mind you, the true nature of why they're there in the first place. As a character going through all of this, what do you think this does at this point in the movie to progress the story in a way that makes Tarzan feel more consequence like he did as a child, like being overwhelmed by the humans, but then realizing he's made a massive mistake?
That's a good question. I don't know if the mistake was like his foolishness. Like I don't know. Like he's definitely ignorant. Everyone's ignorant of Clayton and his intentions, and everyone's another big key, I think, theme with this movie is the element of danger in both worlds, right? And having to contend with that. You have your own like immaturity, your own foolish, notions, your own sort of growing up to do. On top of that, you also have just the dangers that lurk in the shadows. He matures as a result.
I mean, he's been in the jungle for this long in his life. He doesn't know about deceit or deception and things like that. He doesn't, and he's found love in Jane, and he wants to, do everything he can to keep her, and he's bringing her to the family that he's trusted and lived with all his life. So he might not see the dangers or the implications of that as evident as it would be going against Kerchak's wishes or orders. And that sort of, getting Turk and Tantor to distract him. He knows he's like kind of doing something wrong, but he doesn't really care that much. Everything else is more important. Merging his gorilla family with
his worlds together.
Yes, exactly.
Going off of what you just said, I also think Jane and her father they're such good people. He doesn't really have a relationship with Clayton because Clayton has this front. As someone who falls in love with Jane and has her father there, how can anything be like, he just wants to introduce his family to someone who he sees as like perfect and is so good and nice. He doesn't know what Brandon said, deceit and villainy is, when Jane and her father are such nice people, right? How can anything go wrong with their two families merging?
He's still very naive, of course.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And everyone, and again, like everybody is, until they're really faced with the danger of the world, the dangers that are inevitable. The only thing that blows apart your naivety is those things, those terrible things that happen to you by either awful people or by circumstances or by accident. But it's those dangers that lurk underneath that you don't expect. That's really how you grow and how you learn.
When I watch this movie, or when we kind of discuss it like this, I truly don't feel like I can fault Tarzan for his actions. You see the circumstance he's in, and I feel like movies nowadays we kind of put the onus onto the main character. It's like, you should have seen that coming, but he's in this very specific and particular situation that he really doesn't get this. He's just doing everything with the best of intentions. And that's why it's like, I believe it.
Right, because Clayton also lied to him before with their meetings. Like, he says, so if Jane sees gorillas, she stays. And so that's his whole thing is he just wants this new world that he discovered that's like him to stay, right? And someone that he loves. But Clayton's really just twisting that knife because he just really wants to know where the gorilla's location is. So he really lies to him, but he doesn't know that yet. And at this point, after they've meet the family, one of the gorillas steals Clayton's gun, and he's messing around with it. And then Kerchak shows up because Turk and Tantor are running in, and then Kerchak's on like 12. He's furious. He's coming in, and he sees what Tarzan brought into their family, and he sees, Clayton point the gun at the gorilla, and then he goes berserk. But then at this point, this is when Tarzan and Kerchak have the head-to-head, right? The battle of like Tarzan's holding him off. And again, Glenn Keane clearly drew this whole scene. But like he's holding him down, and then he's doing what he did to Turk at the beginning, but it's not, they're not roughing around. This is for real. Like, he's really holding down his father from doing his duty. This is when, he lets go of him because he realizes what he's doing and he's made a mistake. And then Kerchak looks at him and says, I asked you to protect this family and you betrayed us all.
To pause you there for a second, is that actually what he said? Did he say, I asked you to protect this family?
Yeah.
And
you betrayed us all.
That's a really interesting line to me, because it wasn't a command. Like, he said, I asked you. That's even getting closer to that acceptance of being part of the family, rather than saying, I told you, I gave you a command. Like, you see it right there that Tarzan was he's almost where he wanted to be, but he just lost all of that trust. I didn't realize that before, that was the line.
It's such a harsh line, because it's like he's having trouble breathing. Like he's witnessing, Tarzan's looking at his hands because he just hurt his own father, and Kerchak is holding his throat, and he looks over at him and he says the line, and Tarzan's like, what have I done? And that's when he runs away into the jungle, and Colin meets him in the tree, and he said he's like, I'm so confused. I have no idea what to do and what's right. And this is when Kala brings him to the treehouse for the first time in his life, because she says, I have something I should have shown you a long time ago. And when he lifts up that picture frame after he steps on it and he wipes, the dirt away, and he realizes that's his father, and then he hesitates. He says, this is my mother. And he looks over at Kala, and she's like, oh, now you know. It's like she thinks that they're never going to have a relationship again because she's lied to him, but that's not how he sees it, right? But
Hmm.
she says, I just needed you to know, and you have a choice now. And she waits for him outside, and he comes out in the suit, in his father's suit, and she starts crying, and he gives, he makes her realize it's okay, right? He says, no matter where I go, you always be my mother. And she, at that point, she's like, you'll always be in my heart. And it goes back to the theme of, you always, like the song, you'll be in my heart. Like that's their whole thing together, but they're from different worlds. But she has to let him go to make his own decisions, because she's held him long enough now that it's all come to a head, right?
As a mother figure in movies, that she's great. Like they nailed it. They
Yeah.
nailed it. That's something every mother goes through. Like it's just no, it's beautiful. And if I had one bone to pick with this movie, it's a Disney movie. They have to kidify it. We'll get to the ending, but Tarzan stays. He doesn't have to really do what he needs to do.
Yeah, I get you. I get you.
Right. And but I'm not, and that's not fully a criticism, because they do, like, he does come into himself fully when he becomes leader of the tribe. You come to learn that is his destiny, right? That is his destiny, become leader of the troop, I suppose.
Yep.
Me being a realist that I am, I would have, like, as an adult viewer, I would have loved if Tarzan just went and lived in the human world, because that was his duty. They still kind of satisfy that sense of duty with the fact that he becomes leader of the gorilla troop, right? So I get it. It's fine. Like they couldn't have done a better job. Like,
Yeah.
I really, but that, what makes those scenes so beautiful is it's coming to terms with the reality. His mother has to come to terms with reality. He has to come to terms with reality. And I'm glad that they show that, at least, right?
I think what's great about that scene in general is we always talk about showing, not telling in movies. And there was very few dialogue moments, but just the scene of him walking out of the treehouse in the suit, nothing had to be said, right? He walked out, you saw him like fixing his jacket, and you immediately cut to Kala and her starting to cry. You didn't need any dialogue there at all, and they did it perfectly because we knew what was happening, right? She was losing her son
Yeah.
to something
He
that
made
she
that
knew was,
choice.
yeah, he made the choice.
Yeah.
But it's not really a choice. Like, I mean, he doesn't really have a choice, right?
He doesn't. No.
In that moment, like, of course, we can move on. That scene's just sad.
Yeah.
It's sad. Yeah, it's all sad.
Oh man, but it's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's beautiful sad.
Yeah. Now, in the book, if I remember correctly, Tarzan of the Apes, it's quite a bit different. Like the story is so different. Tarzan actually goes to England, and he finds his family. He finds out he's he's part of a well-off family. Does some work.
So he actually
whatever.
does go.
He does
go to England.
Yeah,
Of course
he goes. But then, right, yeah. But in the end, he actually finds Jane. Characters are very different. She actually ends up falling in love with Clayton. And he kind of asks her, will you marry me? And she says no. So he has to kind of makes friends with another explorer that was part of the group that's not in this movie. And he essentially kind of like has to keep that secret of who he is.
That's so interesting. I didn't know that.
It's a very different story. Yeah. But I love this adaptation because it is kind of catering to a younger audience, but keeping the themes very well thought out and more adult.
I remember when I first rewatched the movie, because it had been a long time. I rewatched it a couple of years ago. Because when you're a kid, you're not feeling those emotions. You're not understanding. When you're an adult and you're watching, like, it had been years since I watched it, and I couldn't believe how emotional that was. I don't think there's a Disney movie that gets me more like that. It's crazy.
Right after the scene, Clayton gives it's a great line because he says it at the beginning, and he says, "Have we met?" He does, "Have we met?" And he's looking at him and he's like, "Oh, yes, the ape man." So it's clearly this whole thing has just been like a ruse, right? It's just his persona he's been throwing on. And then Tarzan finally realizes he's just, betrayed everybody. He throws him down into the cellar, right? And then Turk and Tantor have to come rescue him. But this scene, when Tarzan jumps off the boat and like everything, like the music is swelling, but when he jumps, I'm like, you're so ready for what's about to happen because he's pissed and then the music calms, right? Everything swells and you're back in the jungle and all of a sudden you see the flares go off. Everybody's rounding up the gorillas and like Kerchak's trying to fight. And then at the same time, you get this montage of Tarzan just booking it through the jungle. And someone who's watched this movie so much, and it's my favorite movie of all time, I get amped every time it happens. Like he's hauling it, and he's gathering. He doesn't have to say nothing, but he's gathering all the animals because he needs to protect his jungle, right? And he finally gets there, and you hear his hauler, his yodel in the background, and he's coming through, and he's he hits Clayton, cuts Kerchak loose from the net, and then this is when you finally get that you came back, and then Tarzan says, "I came home," and there's that connection, like okay, he really does care about the family, right? And Tarzan's helping Kerchak break all the gorillas loose, and he gets shot. Clayton shoots him in the arm, and that's when Kerchak goes crazy, and he runs at him, and then we lose, and then Kerchak gets shot, and he goes down, and that's when Tarzan just goes berserk. So he's running around, everything's panic, and they're in the trees. And what I love about this scene is when he finally gets head to head with him, and he steals his gun, and Clayton tells him to be a man. He's like, "I'm not a man like you," and he breaks the gun off, and then he has the rain is coming down, but another Glenn Keane scene clearly when it
For
cuts to a
sure.
close up of him, and he looks up, and then Clayton brings out the knife, and there's more chaos. But then Tarzan doesn't deliver the finishing blow; he just ties him up, and Clayton ends up killing himself, and he
Yeah.
ends up being like. Brandon, when you watch this, how crazy was it to see in a kid's movie, like the silhouette shadow when the lightning hit of Clayton hanging by the tree? Like that was for a kids movie, that's insane.
Yeah, it's no, it's yeah, it's dark. There's a lot of cool like imagery in the movie. Obviously, like I know that sounds vague, but I wanted to mention this earlier. We talked about like again a lot of little subtle things that Disney is masterful with. Obviously, right? Even going back to like the Son of Man montage, right? The in time percussive animations. You notice
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
with like
Oh yes.
the gators
They're chomping.
chomping,
Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
and it's like in time with like it's like this cool like and they make these cool rhythms happen in with the animation. Like I guess all this to say that the subtlety of some of this stuff is really great. I mean that's what Disney does with animation, especially, and like a lot of animated movies, they can do that. They can make that magic. Like that's really probably a lot trickier with live action, but it's heavy. Like the movie's heavy. It's not an easy. It's not easy. Like as an adult, like, again talking about those more emotional aspects, those emotional scenes. Like it's really they didn't really have to like sugarcoat a lot of things, which is great.
After Tarzan falls and you see that silhouette, we get this sense of calm. Like he has to, everybody's gathered around Kerchak and he realizes the battle is over, but there has been an incredible loss. And he walks over to Kerchak and he actually pushes his mother away because I feel like it was a moment of this is not the time. I need to be with my father kind of deal. Like he just kind of nudges her away and she understands that he has to go up to him. And this is when we finally get Kerchak admitting that he was always a part of the family. Like he calls him, my son, and he walks off. The music is swelling, and he takes the pose, and he does for the first time in the movie. He bangs his chest because that's clearly what the leader does,
Yeah.
right? As
Yeah.
a sign that you're gonna follow me now, and that's essentially the end of the movie, right? He's accepted that he is the king of the jungle. He's leading his family, and he will protect them for the rest of his life because of the sacrifice and protection that Kerchak instilled in him, unintentionally, right? We cut to Jane and her father leaving, and then she speaks gorilla, and she tells all the gorillas that she's going to stay with Tarzan, and then we get the finale with two worlds and Jane swinging through the trees, and we end on Tarzan giving the final call of the movie. The movie can stand on its own, but clearly the soundtrack makes this movie what it is as a whole. So what do you think overall, your thoughts on this movie, going back and watching it now?
The movie is extremely well executed, like the story and the deeper meanings and the archetypes, and obviously the soundtrack plays a giant role in that. I think, as far as what makes the soundtrack so fitting, maybe we'll talk musically because we didn't get to talk about that a bit. But like musically, you have Phil Collins, who's a drummer, writing these songs and performing the instruments on the soundtrack. So it's that rhythm, that very inspired drumming, that being influenced by progressive music, which can encompass a whole range of different genres and styles of music. So, obviously he's drawing on more African inspired rhythms, big toms, which Phil is known for, right? I'm a, pretty big Phil Collins fan. This is the kit he used, well, he still uses, these 80s Gretsch drums I have behind me. I use in my studio here. But for me, at least, it's like, it's cool that Disney had the sense to to consider all this. It's like, not just who's the most relevant, perhaps, even though he was pretty relevant at the time, but not maybe as big as he was in the earlier 90s or the late 80s, right? You need a really inspired soundtrack. It can't just be, we're just going to overdub a pop star
Right.
over whatever,
which is what they sometimes do now.
It's got to
Some
be
movies.
it's got to be
Yeah.
and that's what I mean by it's got to have some musical prowess. Like, and Phil is coming from, again, that progressive rock world, and progressive rock bands like Genesis, and you're talking about music that isn't cookie cutter at all. It's not. It has those elements of, like, those odd rhythms, those odd time signatures. It draws on influences from other cultures, from other styles of music. That's what makes it progressive rock. So you have this, and here's why it's perfect. You have this progressive rock icon in Phil Collins, the drummer slash singer and composer, but you also have Phil Collins, the pop star. It's perfect. Like, he already has the Disney in him.
Very, very true. Yes.
So he's perfect. Like, they couldn't have. It couldn't have been better, and he probably would have been great on other soundtracks. And I know he's on Brother Bear too, as well. But when it comes to composing music for movies, it's like, it has to come from a genuine place, like with real musical prowess, and they nailed it with him. As far as the movie as a whole, I love the story. I think it's one of those stories that always will stand the test of time, as far as, because it incorporates all those very human, relatable elements, those archetypes, coming of age, how important that family structure is, the honor and integrity that both his families had, right? To make him, which contributed greatly to who he was. The way this movie ties all those themes together is brilliantly executed.
Yeah, Brandon, I think you said it really well. There's enduring themes that people will just inherently connect to, whether it's family or understanding that differences aren't that important, overcoming challenges, overcoming the call to adventure and call to leadership.
I wish I would have mentioned, the call to adventure is huge in this movie. That sense of, like, what's out there, what's beyond,
Yeah, that sense of wonder that he has is just so captivating. And yeah, I could go back to this movie at any point and feel the same way each time. I just have a really strong appreciation for this movie. The music's amazing. The storytelling is wonderful. Seeing it now from an older perspective, picking apart more of the design aspects of it, it's timeless. It's not going to be a movie that looks bad at any point. It always is going to be beautiful.
I would even say, even to contribute to that, the visual aspect of it, like, I was rewatching it, and I don't know how much of it was like re-digitized or like revamped, but I was like, this looks like it just came out yesterday. Like, it's crazy.
I said the same thing to Adria.
Yep.
Like, it's amazing.
It's wonderful. Just overall, it's a great movie. What did you think, Brian?
Well, I'm pretty biased because this has been my favorite movie since I was a child, and it still is my number one. And even animation-wise, no matter what I love, it was still, nothing will ever top it for me, just because of the impact it had growing up. Even like the soundtrack alone, I had it on all the time. But I was a very active child, so having this movie, I always wanted to be like, I instantly wanted to do what he did, right? And that had such a major influence. But I think as an adult, all the characters are so relatable, and like they all have very obviously human emotions and human characteristics, but like even the gorillas, like everybody is likable, and there's reasons for them being the way they are. Clearly, as a child, you're just there for the music and like the action, and like you know you love animals, so that's clearly one thing. Same with the Lion King. If you love lions, it's going to be one of your things. But obviously, as you age, as a teenager, as an adult, you'll start noticing different themes and like different reasons why you love the movie. And learning, you know, the excitement and the wonder of learning new things is exactly what we feel when we want to learn new things. But then there's also that total twist of him being betrayed. They hit it on the head. Like how he feels in the movie is exactly what it feels like to be, you know, let down, and you believed in something and it was not what it was, right?
That's huge what you just said, Brian, about like that call to adventure is in everyone. No matter how much you're told, it's not, maybe not all it's cracked up to be, or there's, you know, danger lurking in that adventure, but you can't escape it and you have to follow it. That's the key. Is like you don't have a choice, right? And Disney's really good at that, like conveying that story with with a lot of their characters. That's the reason I love Moana, is like she doesn't have a choice, and it's not like there's this like she overcomes every challenge she faces. Like she it's not like she's but she even tries to resist it, and she can't.
Right.
And it's not even like you can't even put your finger on what's causing her to move forward, right? It's not really tangible, but it's something we all relate to. Now there's always the veil gets torn down, and you see what's behind the wizard, right? You see what's behind Oz, you know, and it's like,
Exactly.
oh, but you had to find out.
I like the line in Two Worlds, before Sabor attacks Colin Kerchak's
Yep.
son. Danger's no stranger here, and it's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
no matter if it's actually part of the jungle or if it's entering from outside, there's still danger. So
Yeah.
like
Always.
you're prepared. You have to be prepared for it.
What's the line before that? It's like build stronger beams, like lift higher loads. Because the flood is coming, you know. It's like that.
Yeah, it's almost like prepare yourself because you're in for it no matter what we do. Great line. Wow, I like that.
The lyrics are so good. Like
They're
the lyrics
so good.
are I can't believe how he gets it. Like he just got it. Like it's crazy.
And I think also, other than all the other themes, what really draws us to keep coming back to this movie is it's a real coming of age story, and it's something we all see in ourselves. To like, you know, his whole journey, we're watching it. By the time he actually comes back to save his family and take that position as leader, as what he wanted to do when he was a child, you know, it's never going to get stale, right? It's always going to feel empowering.
And just to add to that, musically, like I'm sure Mark Mancina had a lot to do with this, because in composing for film, you have to do what's called word painting. What's happening musically has to reflect the lyrics. So whether it's the chord structure or the vibe of the tempo, Two Worlds, it starts very like it's this kind of like rumbling, rolling drum thing, and it's very ominous, and then it breaks into like this beautiful, nice, serene, like put your faith in what you most believe. It's like it cuts to that, but then it goes to the verse, and it's like
That
almost
uncertain,
ominous,
uneasy
like
jungle.
uncertain, uneasy. You get you get that happening musically, and it's just that's the emotion. It has to convey it musically. It can't just be the lyrics. Like Son of Man, it's immediately like it's just like yep. Yeah, like what is that? Why did he do that? It's because
Exactly.
it's like, here we go.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's just awesome.
Because that's what Tarzan's feeling, right? We just left on him saying, I'm going to be the best ape ever. I'm going to prove it to him. And that was the last line. So like, hey, let's go. Let's kick this off of his journey to become what he wanted to, he set his mind to.
I really feel like the consistency of the other characters' traits are also very endearing, for multiple views, where we see, we could potentially see ourselves in some of those roles in the future. Future parents, as that unfaltering friend in like Tantor, or as
Turk.
I can't do it in Turk. But then also having that protecting leadership role in Kerchak. Everybody's consistent. Everybody's got their role, and they fulfill it really, really well. And I think that watching it over and over again, you can find little bits of yourself in all of those characters too, which is again why I think this story is really endearing.
This story will always stand the test of time, like most of, all the other Disney films. They're basically simple stories, right? They're down to simple stories, characters that we can all relate to, and there's a message. There's always underlying themes, and that's why all those movies still work when you rewatch them today. So, for everybody listening, what is your favorite Disney film? And if you think this is up there in the top, 10 or 5 of your list, it's number 1 for me. I don't know about you guys where it ranks in yours, but it will always be number 1.
I agree. Out of Disney movies, this is one of the top ones for me too. Absolutely. Yeah, but we'd love to hear what everybody else thinks of Tarzan. If there's any other Disney movies that really speak to you, we want to hear about it.
And thank you, Brandon, for hopping on today to join us to talk about Tarzan.
Thank you for having me.
Anytime.
That was fun.
So thank you all for listening. And this has been 2 Hours on a Sunday. I'm Brian.
I'm Nick.
And we'll catch you guys later.